This week, we're exploring some of the biggest themes and challenges facing the crypto community based on conversations that were had at Consensus 2023. Joining us now to discuss just one of the chapters in CoinDesk's Consensus at Consensus report is CoinDesk Deputy Managing Editor of Global Policy and Regulation, Jesse Hamilton. Jesse, welcome to the show.
Thanks for having me.
All right, let's get right into this report. Tell us about your chapter, Privacy Concerns Dominate CBDC Discussions at Consensus 2023.
Yeah, so at Consensus, some folks were gathered to get into the pitfalls and potential benefits of a central bank digital currency in the U.S. That's a digital dollar, of course, here. And it would basically be a government-backed asset issued by the Federal Reserve to have all the utility of a paper dollar. That comes with the advantages of instant transactions, seamless movement of money across borders. It also comes with a tremendous amount of data that could be collected by the institutions running it, whether purely governmental or partially private sector. And that's, I think, a concern for a lot of people looking into this.
You did a survey on people's views with the digital dollar and whether this could be done in a way that preserved privacy. What were some of the takeaways? What did you find? What were people saying?
So this is actually an amazing stat to me. But we took this survey of participants there, and only 9%, less than 1 in 10 people, thought government could properly handle surveillance-free government-backed currency. That's obviously not a lot of confidence, though I guess we have to acknowledge the crowd there is probably admittedly skewed toward at least some level of government suspicion.
Nonetheless, I mean, this was the question I posed to Michael Casey yesterday. Isn't it kind of difficult for government to want to give up power or to not want to take as much power as it can, if you will? And I'm not talking about guys in jackboots knocking on doors and things like that at 2 a.m. and taking your children away. I'm talking more along the lines of, they got the technology to, check out what people are doing every now and then. And, maybe you don't use the kind of vendors they like for certain things, somebody getting paid off. I live in New Jersey. I know what that's all about. But I mean, isn't that kind of the sort of thing that is very difficult to keep government from doing just by nature?
Once government has power, as we've seen in history, it rarely voluntarily relinquishes it. So is this a slippery slope? I mean, it's one of the major concerns here. Once government establishes this, if it does it just sort of keep heading in, I think, the wrong direction as far as a surveillance state?
Jesse, one thing that's become very interesting in the CBDC debate is, at least within the United States context, how just the negative argument, it really prevails right now. Like, you just kind of don't hear anybody really defending this. I guess maybe the closest person would be someone like Chris Giancarlo, who's saying that, the U.S. has a chance to set the standard for a privacy protecting CBDC. But basically, in your research for this report, did you see really anybody making a strong positive case for a digital dollar in the U.S.?
So that is kind of the interesting situation here. It's a bit of it can be a bit of a straw man argument from opponents because there is basically an absence of strong and solid support from the government side. And you know what? One thing that's really interesting here is that amazingly this privacy issue has fit right into the partisan divide on the U.S. presidential campaign. For whatever reason, the issuance of a CBDC in the U.S. has become a hot topic among Republicans who sort of without a lot of evidence accuse Democrats of really wanting this thing so the government can spy on citizens. And Florida Governor Ron DeSantis is a major opponent, along with a lot of other Republicans, but also Democrat Robert Kennedy Jr., who's obviously trying to challenge President Biden. And so, despite the digital dollar only really getting into the studying phase at the Federal Reserve, a few lawmakers have been pursuing legislation to actually ban it. And Fed officials have said time and again that they would need support from the White House and Congress before they'd go anywhere close to greenlighting these dollars. So it does beg the question, who's on the pro side of this argument?
If we take a global look at what's going on with CBDCs, there are a few pilots happening in different countries around the world. Any noteworthy pilots that are happening now that maybe the U.S. can look to and learn from?
So, yeah, I think that's the interesting question here too. So there's special interest for the U.S. in two of the current projects. I'd say the effort in China, which is already sort of well ahead of the U.S., and then in Europe. For Republicans here, the fact that the Chinese are ahead on this is actually a detractor, as in, why would the U.S. want to follow a China surveillance state? But the European version could certainly be of more utility for investors and start making the U.S. look like it's missing the boat. That really seems to be the process to measure the U.S. against, and where I think people here might be concerned that they're falling into a competitive disadvantage.
Jesse, thank you very much for joining us this morning.
Thanks for having me.
That was CoinDesk Deputy Managing Editor of Global Policy and Regulation, Jesse Hamilton. And you can find the consensus at Consensus Report on CoinDesk.com.